A story from Scotland. Scotland is a land of fogs and mists, of beautiful lowland moors and of steep hills. It's a land of courageous warriors and powerful wizards and very brave girls. And this is a story of a girl such as that. There was once two sisters, and one morning one of them went off to do her farm chores. There were cows to milk and chickens to feed, and she went here and there, she did this and that. But come supper time, she didn't come home. And her parents and her sister, her older sister, way back then and there, they did what parents and sisters would do right here and now. They went looking for her. And they were calling through the glens, and they were looking over the hills. And they looked high and low and here and there, but they could find her nowhere. And that night, around the fire there, the older sister said to her parents, "It's me that'll fetch her. I'll go find my sister and I'll bring her back." And her mother said, "Now, dear, that's good, but if you're going to be doing that, you're going to be needing this." And they gave to her a pouch of gold coins. It was all they had. They put a ring of pure silver on her finger. Her mother gave her needle and thread and said, "You never know when you may be needing to mend something." And her father gave her a wee but a stout knife. But the last thing they gave to her, just as she walked out the door, they gave to her each and all and every one of their blessings. They told her how much they loved her, how deeply they cared for her, and how much they believed in her. And with all of that, she walked out the narrow door into the wide, wide world and down the long road to find her sister. Well, now, she looked for a day, and a day became two, and then two became a week, and a week became two. And she looked in town and village and countryside. She looked high and low and here and there, but she could find her sister nowhere. And the very day that she was about to turn and go back home, she just happened to notice out of the corner of her eye, way in the distance, there was a great green mountain. And on top of the mountain, a huge dark tower. And a wee small voice inside of her said, "Now, that's where you might find your sister." And she listened to the wee small voice, and down the road she went, towards the great green mountain and the dark tower. Well, she'd been walking about a mile or so when she saw someone coming towards her. Well, it was nothing more than a poor young man, a tinker, a man selling pots and pans. And he was so poor, he didn't have a horse. In fact, he had to pull this heavy wooden-wheeled cart behind him. And he could barely clear a small rise in the road. And the sister said, "Now that looks like difficult work. You know, I live on a farm. I know what hard work is all about." And she reached into her bag of coins and she said, "Why don't you take some of my gold coins? They've been doing me no good. It might help you one day to buy a horse." And he took the gold coins and he said, "Lass, you know, people come up and down this road every day and no one even pays me a kind word. And here come you and you give me gold. Well, about all I can give to you are two pieces of advice. If you're going down this road to climb that green mountain, to go to that dark tower, you may want to know that is where an evil wizard lives. And things in his tower, they're not always the way they seem. And if you are going there, don't. For many a maid I've seen go there, and none have I ever seen come back." But she said, "I'm a strong-willed lass, and I've come to fetch my sister, and I'm going to find her." And down the road she went. Down the road she went, and up the great green mountain she climbed. And it was a tall mountain. And she climbed for a day, and then two, and then three. And upon that day, she met another man. This kind of a man back in those days was called a bow-dash. A bow-dash means a raggedy man. For he was leaning against a log sitting down, but his clothes were all ripped and torn and ragged. But as the sister passed him by, she could see that he had pieced all the rips and the rents in the cloth together with big, thick blackthorns from a blackthorn bush. And she looked at him and said, "Now, what a curious way of mending cloth. I didn't know you could use thorns. I've never thought of that." And she said, "Have you ever tried a needle and a thread?" And she gave that to him, and he took it. And he said, "Lass, you know, people come up and down this hill, And no one even says hello to me. And now how come you and you give me needle and thread? And I'm afraid all I can give to you are two pieces of advice. If you go on up the hill to that tower, you may want to know it's where an evil wizard lives. And you'll find that silver, like the ring you have on your finger there, that would be good against his powerful evil. And if you are going there, don't. Because the maids I've seen go there, I've never, ever seen come back. But of course, she said to him, I'm a strong-willed lass, and I've come to fetch my sister, and it's me that's going to find her. And up the hill she went. And at last to the great dark tower she came. But now the wind was blowing off the sea, and it was cold, and the fog was gathering around her, and she was sore afraid. But she pounded on the door, and she pounded again, and she pounded a third time, and as she did that door, it creaked open, and creaked open, and creaked open. And she looked up at an enormous wizard, dressed in a black robe, and his dark eyes were just staring right through her. And his smile, it was as wicked as it was wide. And he said, well, now, you must have come looking for your sister. You just might find her here. And then he backed away and just seemed to disappear into the shadows. And she was sore afraid. But she loved her sister so much. She stepped across the threshold and into the tower. And she took another step and another. And when she reached the middle of the tower, just like that, flames of fire, they shot out of the floor and caught her dress on fire. And she shrieked, and she did what anyone would do. She turned to run, but as she did, she remembered. She remembered what that man had told her. Things in his tower aren't always the way they seem. And she stopped, and she waited, and she looked, and even though the flames were burning, her dress was untouched. Even though the smoke was billowing, she was unharmed. And she just waited until the flames burned and billowed away. And then she went walking deeper into that tower, looking for her sister. She came to a hallway, and she pushed open a door to that room. She pushed open a door to this room. But when she opened a door to that room, she looked inside. She said, no, oh, no. There were dozens of young maidens in that room, but all of them had been turned into stone. They were nothing more than stone statues. And sure enough, she walked about them until she found the statue that was her own sister. And she said, that wizard, he's turned my flesh and blood sister into a block of stone, but what can I do? What can I do? But then she remembered that silver ring tingling upon her finger there. Remember the silver? And she took it. And she put the ring on this finger of her sister, and that finger, and this one and that one. But when she put it on that finger, the stone melted away. And who was standing right in front of her? Her sister. And they embraced. They were so glad to see one another. But then the older sister took her younger sister's hand, and she led her out of the room and down the passageway. And they fairly flew across the main room of the tower. They pushed open the great oak door. And now they went running down the hill as fast as they could go. They were running and running and running and running. But that's when the wizard came to the tower window. And he looked down upon those two sisters. And he cast a wicked eye upon them. And then he shifted his shape. He turned his shape from that of a wizard into that of an enormous wolf. And as a wolf, he leapt out of the tower window and down and down and down. Now he was bounding right after those two sisters. And they were running for their lives as fast as they could go, running around the blackthorns and leaping over the creeks, and down and down and down they were coming. But they were no match for a wizard turned into a wolf. And now they could feel his hot breath upon him. And just as he prepared to pounce, that older sister, she remembered there was one thing she had left. It was nothing more than a wee little knife, which is nothing against a great wizard. But as she reached into the pockets of her dresses there, and as she pulled it out, somehow it got all tangled. It got all gathered up with every blessing her parents had given her. Well, she couldn't even see him, but when she turned and she threw that knife, it twisted and turned and twirled, and it found its way right into the heart of that wizard. And down he came with a thud, and he didn't get up again. And the sisters turned, and they saw from that dark tower all of the maidens that had been in that room. Well, now they were no longer stone, they were flesh and blood. They came out of the tower, and when the last of them came out, that tower tumbled into a pile of rubble. And when they turned to look to where the wizard had fallen, he was nothing more than a little dark cinder, a stone upon the earth. The two sisters, they made their way all the way down to the road, and they started making their long walk home. But as they were walking, what should they see coming towards them but a man? Remember the man that was pulling the cart? Well, he was no longer pulling a cart. Now he was driving a fine coach with two beautiful horses. And he said to the sisters, "I was once a great coachman, but a wizard put me under a spell and made me pull a cart around for the rest of my days. He must be gone now, for I'm free to be who I truly am." And that man offered a ride to the two sisters. And of course, they took it. And then a door opened from the coach. And out of it got another man dressed in a fine suit. And he said, "I was once a great tailor, but a wizard put me under a spell, turned me into a bodash and made me sew my clothes with thorns for the rest of my days. He must be gone now, for I'm free to be who I truly am." Well, the man offered the sisters a ride home, and they took it. And the parents, they were so elated to see the girls alive and well, they gave these lads a place to stay that night, and supper, and breakfast before they left the next day. But you see, these lads, they found some chores to do on the farm, and they stayed the next day for supper and the next day for breakfast. And they found a few more chores to do and stayed the next day for supper and the next day for breakfast. Well, you see, the fact of the matter is, one of the sisters fancied the coachman, and the other one fancied the tailor. And they did leave in time, but it was only after a great wedding had been held. It was a great wedding, and I know for a fact because I was there. And I told stories at it. And all the stories I told there, well, just like the story I'm telling you right here, they finally did come to an end. And that is the tale known as the tale of the two sisters from Scotland.